Welcome to another episode of the Sports Sentiment. I am your host, Nick Urias, and we are back once again talking NBA basketball. It's the NBA draft, a week removed from the draft after it was taking place in the Barclays Center in Brooklyn. Everybody's arrived at their destinations where they were drafted. Everyone arrived. I mean that for Ace Bailey. Got a little worried there for, maybe some fans and the Utah Jazz who took Ace Bailey at number 5 overall. We're going to get into all of the NBA draft, my winners, losers, some great mid to late first round picks, and some great value picks. Some teams that did some good jobs, some bad jobs, the bad trade by the New Orleans Pelicans. But let's start off right off the top here with the draft. It was centralized around Cooper Flagg, the Dallas Mavericks made the Luka Doncic trade, and Nico Harrison, of course, he gets rewarded with the number 1 overall pick after winning the lottery with like less than 1% odds. And Cooper Flagg is a Dallas Maverick. Now, it's a very interesting scenario here with the Dallas Mavericks, right? Because they already got a talented roster. This Dallas Maverick front court is going to be one of the best in the league. And you look at it with Anthony Davis, Daniel Gafford, Derek Lively, and then you add Cooper Flagg. Cooper Flagg, obviously one of these players where if you didn't watch him at Duke, you could throw him anywhere you want. You could run him with the point at 6'10". Then he could go out and, play the dunker spot and, slash and dunk and do all of that craziness, block shots at an extremely high rate. This is just one of the more prized possessions that we've seen with the number 1 overall pick. Maybe since Zion Williamson. I know Zion hasn't panned out in the NBA, but coming out of college, Zion Williamson coming out of Duke was extremely hyped up. Every game was must-watch TV. And Cooper Flagg's kind of, let's just be honest here, he's been etch-a-sketched into the number 1 overall pick for 2 years. So now that it's came into fruition, now that he was finally off the board last Wednesday, and the fact that it comes into a Dallas Maverick team, everybody was kind of having these conversations months ago. Well, can it be the Jazz? Can it be the Wizards, right? Like, what's the most optimal spot for him? The Dallas Mavericks, with the addition of Cooper Flagg, all of a sudden become a contender with what they have. That I just rattled off their front court. Then you throw in a healthy Kyrie Irving by January coming off the torn ACL. The free agency moves that are being made to solidify the starting point guard position, to survive the Kyrie first half injury. And of course, you still got Klay Thompson, who not the same player, but still one of the more streakier shooters in all of the league. So the Dallas Mavericks are in a great spot. The Cooper Flagg situation here with Dallas, all of a sudden, you're going to be selling jerseys again. So Nico Harrison, a little bit of a blessing in disguise there, winning the lottery, but I'm taking this Dallas Maverick team very seriously when they are healthy, which obviously is, the underlining issue here with this team in the West. As far as some other, just let's talk about winners and losers, actually, because I got 3 winners, I got 3 losers for you all. Let's start out with the winners. San Antonio, the Spurs. They've been doing a lot of tanking over the past couple of years. Victor Wembanyama, they've made it clear and obvious, the Spurs organization, that they want to build around him. I mean, the 7'5" unicorn, biggest wingspan in all of the league. He can shoot the 3. I mean, his 3-point shot last year was so much better than his rookie campaign. And this guy just keeps on getting better and better and better. He's only entering year 3. And San Antonio, they understand the situation here because they've built winners for decades here. With the old David Robinson run and then the Tim Duncan run with Manu Ginobili and Tony Parker. They've had their down years, no doubt. They had the little run there with Kawhi and they won their championship. But now they've retooled, reset. They've torn down the building the right way, and they're rebuilding it right now, and they're ready to take that next step because they've drafted extremely well the past couple of years. Stephon Castle, Rookie of the Year. We came on this podcast last year and told you Castle was going to be good, and he's only 20 years old. He's only going to get better. Some of the other valuable picks that they've had, Jeremy Sohan, kind of their do-it-all, crazy guy that, is just really good at everything. So San Antonio has done a good job building this thing. I think they took another step last Wednesday with their first round draft picks. Dylan Harper, look, I think it's going to be a very intriguing point guard, roles here with everybody in San Antonio because you traded for De'Aaron Fox. Now you got Dylan Harper, this kid out of Rutgers, who's just an all-out scorer and more creative, scorer, I would say, than maybe his counterpart in Ace Bailey at Rutgers last year. And then you're gonna have Stephon Castle, who here's the thing about Castle. Castle's gonna be able to play with anybody. He played with six other All-Stars at UConn, and he came off the bench, and he was the first guy off the board. So I don't have a problem with Castle fitting in with Harper. My deal is with Fox. I don't know what's gonna happen here with Fox. He's getting paid, he's like the second highest paid player on the team, after they pay Wemby, of course. What's the deal here with Fox? Like, is this obviously you have to play him? He's an all-star. He's one of these guys. He's going to do so much for you. But how do they manage the minutes there? That's going to be very interesting for me. But San Antonio, number 2 overall. Obviously, Cooper Flagg, number 1 overall. For San Antonio, you just have to take the best available and let the coaching staff deal with it. Maybe you trade Fox at the trade deadline or something like that. If you sell high on a guy like that, if just the fit doesn't feel right, but the numbers are there. Interesting perspective there from San Antonio. I don't know how that's going to work out. That's a situation that I'll be monitoring through the first half of the regular season. And then Carter Bryant, they take Bryant at whatever it was, 15th overall, something along the range in the teens range. And this is a guy from Arizona that. Look, he didn't even start in a lot of the games at Arizona. And it was one of these ordeals that he just fits in the NBA. 6'8", 220 pounds, great perimeter defender. Outside shooting is great. Carter Bryant is one of these guys where I was a little bit worried if he was going to get taken too high and go to the wrong spot where he was going to be obligated to score a lot. It was going to be, not the greatest fit for him. But in the NBA draft, and with, certain players in order for them to excel, all these guys have talent, no doubt. But it's all about the fit. And it's all about how do you fit in with the star players and, the foundational pieces. San Antonio's got their foundation. And Carter Bryant is just one of these complementary guys. Ultimately in San Antonio, I think that's how he'll fit. Perimeter defender, go hit your threes, give us something every single night. If you give us 8 points off the bench and, solidify the second unit, and you go out there and pick up everybody, beyond half court, you're doing your job. So I like the fit for Carter Bryant. Obviously, he could expand. His ceiling's going to be, I think ultimately people thought his ceiling's going to be so much higher. But the fact that he's in San Antonio, I think that's the way that they'll use him based on all the personnel. So San Antonio, I thought was one of my 3 winners in the NBA draft. And, a lot of people seem to be on the same boat in that regard. How about the Charlotte Hornets? I would have never thought after, all these years, of doing this, that Charlotte was going to be on my winners list. But I have to say, they had 3 draft picks, and I thought they went 3 for 3. The Hornets had the number 4 overall pick. Everyone was kind of saying the draft started at 3, maybe even 4, because, as the draft got closer and closer, VJ Edgecombe out of Baylor, the ultra-athletic forward, was going to go to Philly. And the Charlotte Hornets draft Con Knueppel out of Duke. And, Con Knueppel, one of these guys, high IQ for only 19 years old. And this is a guy, what makes Con Knueppel so valuable, and I think it's what's going to make him so good in the NBA. Not only is he a great three-point shooter, was 40% at Duke in his freshman year, but this is a guy, and what he really impressed me, in March Madness, great cutter. And he showcased that I can play defense on the ball, and he is very easy to play with. He's one of these guys. He's not going to get in the way. He doesn't need the ball in his hands, but this is a guy that's just got great IQ and great feel for the game, which is what Charlotte needs. You don't need another ball-dominant guard, right? Like, if you would have taken Fears or somebody else, even Edgecombe, I would have felt like not very comfortable with the fit. Because you got LaMelo Ball, you got Brandon Miller. Now you could throw Con Knueppel straight into that backcourt. And he's one of these guys where he's going to drop 15 a night and, have a couple assists, have a couple blocks. He's just going to do a little bit of everything for you, but he's not going to disrupt the flow of a guy like Brandon Miller or LaMelo Ball. Now, is LaMelo the guy long-term? He's got to stay healthy, of course. And I think the jury's still out on LaMelo Ball, quite honestly, as far as making Charlotte a winner. So we'll see how that pans out. But based on that 3-man, core there with LaMelo, Con Knueppel, and Brandon Miller, Charlotte got better in that regard taking Con Knipple at number 4 overall. As far as their other two picks, both were in the second round, and I thought the Hornets did well here. Sion James from Duke. Played his final year at Duke, but was a 4-year guy at Tulane. Everybody knows I love my experienced college players. 4 years at Tulane, the 1 year at Duke. He's not one of these guys that's going to score a lot for you. He only averaged 8 points per game last year at Duke. Duke was an extremely stacked roster. He battled with an injury around, January to March timeframe. I think he came back for the ACC tournament in that North Carolina semifinal game prior to the March Madness run. But this is a guy, he is a defense first piece. What has Charlotte lacked over the years? Defense. Charlotte, I mean, he's going to get playing time regardless of what the roster looks like because the Hornets can't guard a nosebleed, and that's been the issue for over a decade. He's probably going to be one of their better defenders, on the opening day roster. So I would be shocked if he's in the G League. I think this is a guy where I would say the player comp for me, as far as impact is concerned, not that I'm saying he's going to turn into this player, Lou Dort. That I would say Sion James has the upside of a Lou Dort, where, if Charlotte is a contender one of these days, Lou Dort is going to be or Lou Dort could be, Charlotte's Sion, or Sion James could be, the Lou Dort in Charlotte, where he's impacting and, things all over the place from the defensive side of the ball. And, his offensive game could, pick up, as he develops as a player. But I really like that pick there for Charlotte. And then Ryan Kalkbrenner for Charlotte going in the second round. Kalkbrenner, three-time Big East Player of the Year. He had the 4 years at Creighton, 7'1", 270 pounds. Obviously, foundational piece for Creighton after all these years. He was like the reason why they were in, making deep runs in March and, just impacting games defensively. The wingspan's off the charts. The shot blocking is second to none. He had like 7 blocks in an NCAA tournament game in one of his years there. And, he's getting better with the 3-point shot. I remember seeing him taking a few more 3-pointers at Creighton in his senior year, and he was making them. And it's one of these ordeals here. They have some veterans out there in Charlotte, like whatever. They had Taj Gibson. I think he retired. And, they're going to roll out Bismack Biyombo, I imagine, again. But Kalkbrenner, you don't really have to rush him. Like, he could start with the Greensboro team in the G League and then, work his way up. But I think by February, March, this is a guy that's going to get minutes. Charlotte's always banged up every single year. But at the dunker spot, Charlotte needed a dude that can play both ways, especially on the offensive side, because they've kind of needed that. Like, they've missed with all these dudes over the years. I think Kalkbrenner could be a legitimate piece for Charlotte here. Whether he starts, come off the bench in a couple of years, I think he's going to make an impact on this roster regardless. It just might take a little bit more time. Maybe. I don't know. We'll see. Like I said, Charlotte is one of these teams where at the end of the year when, post All-Star break, everybody's hurt and they're playing all their G League guys. So this is going to be, I thought, ultimately a great class for the Charlotte Hornets, hitting with these 3 picks, and which is something you don't say all too often, because you look at their draft history over the years, it's like, okay, how can you script the LaMelo Ball pick because you're number 2 overall? But this is a team that's sucked for years, have been in the basement, they've gotten bad lottery luck, and then they've just drafted the wrong guy. So the Hornets, do I expect them to be very good in a very weak Eastern Conference next year? No. At the same time, I just want to see collective steps from this team and the individual players. And I want to see LaMelo Ball play like, I don't know, 72 games next year and really impact winning, because we just really haven't seen him do that over the stretch of the long-term season. So that's what I'm looking for from Charlotte's perspective. I still, quite honestly, expect them to stink next year, with all that being said. And then finally, to round off my winners list, this is going to be kind of, probably a team that no one's expecting, but this is why I'm here to talk about it. The Indiana Pacers. Yes, they were just in the NBA Finals. Yes, they have a lot of depth. But I thought their 2 draft picks in the second round, that is, are going to be pieces that ultimately in 2 years from now, you're going to hear their names. Cam Jones from Marquette. Terrific 2-way player in the Big East. Was a great isolation scorer at the NBA level, I think he needs to be a little bit better and, establish more of a consistent three-point jump shot. But the upside is there. The talent is definitely there. And the defense is there. The on-ball defense, what he was doing to all of these teams in the Big East last year was incredible. Like Marquette was a good team last year. They made the March Madness, of course, the NCAA tournament, but they were not the same old fearful Marquette teams that Shaka Smart's had over the years. And Cam Jones was basically, along with like two other guys, the only two, impact pieces that were, taking them, I know they lost in the first round of New Mexico, but to a deep and respectable run in the Big East tournament. Like he was a large reason why they won games at Marquette last year. And Cam Jones, second round value. I mean, I might be one of these suckers that, just love the experienced winning college players, but that's what this pick is. And I also think another pick that was on nobody's radar, was on nobody's draft board. I mean, if you would have told me he would have got drafted, I would have said, okay, I'm pleasantly surprised. But Talon Peter out of Liberty. I think a lot of people were shocked to see this guy. I mean, some he wasn't even on some people's top 100 list. And here we are. This guy, was projected to go undrafted. He had the 5 years at Liberty. He's a great three-point shooter, can score with the ball, if necessary. But, he's also one of these guys, catch and shoot three-point shooters, which is obviously so valuable in the league. And, you'll never say no to one of these guys that are like 40% from three in college, and it just translates to the league. But we got to understand the situation here in Indiana next year. No Tyrese Halliburton because of the finals game 7 Achilles tear. You're going to have Andrew Nembhard, you're going to have TJ McConnell, and you're going to have maybe somebody else come off the bench, like the Neesmiths of the world and, some other guys. But Cam Jones, I would expect him to get minutes next year. Like, it's one of these things, right? Like, all of a sudden, like, Andrew Nembhard, your starting point guard. McConnell's going to be your veteran, guy that's going to come off the bench and, just have 2 steals and 8 points like he did in the finals. Like, that's his role, on every team that he's been on in his entire career. And Cam Jones, he's one of these guys. He picks up players defensively, like you're going to get on the court. So I like that for Jones, and I think Talon Peter will almost play like that Aaron Neesmith type role and try to find a way to make an impact there. Now, I would say these guys aren't going to get playing time at all, especially the way Indiana's depth is, but Halliburton's injury is going to be, the recovery is going to be so long and you don't know how he's going to come back from it. Indiana's one of these teams that they play 12 dudes in these regular season games. Sure, they might start in the G League, but I'd expect them to come up. Indiana and Rick Carlisle are not afraid to play anybody, and that can change by a game-to-game basis here. So I'm very interested to see what the Pacers, got chalked up here. And overall, like, this is a team that hasn't gotten enough credit for what they've done, just trade-wise, but, draft pick-wise, right? Like Aaron Neesmith, obviously big-time piece for the Pacers finals run. This guy was rotting on the bench in Boston. And, they made like a little minor trade. It was one of these whatever trades that we saw, that Woj tweet out like 3 years ago. And we're like, okay, whatever. And then all of a sudden you see this guy blossom. Obviously, the Siakam trade's a big one. Payne Obi topping the money that they did to get him out of, his hometown in New York with the Knicks. Like, the Pacers have done a really good job of drafting and making these big time trades and, under the radar trades that ultimately fit their team well. They really haven't had any misses in over 4 years now. So give that, administration and organization a whole lot of credit for what they've been doing there. So our NBA draft winners, just to recap it: the Indiana Pacers with Cam Jones and Talon Peter, the Charlotte Hornets with Con Knipple, Sion James, and Ryan Kalkbrenner, and then the San Antonio Spurs, who I expect to take another positive step in the right direction in the Western Conference next year, at the very least a 7 seed in the Western Conference, and you're playing in, meaningful April play-in tournament games. Very well can make the playoffs, wouldn't shock anybody at all, with the San Antonio Spurs drafting Dylan Harper and Carter Bryant. All right, let's get to our losers. The New Orleans Pelicans. What are we doing here, New Orleans? So you take Jeremiah Fears, number 7 overall. He was there. He was a top 10 pick, freshman out of Oklahoma. Uh, Down the stretch, I'd say single-handedly, got the Oklahoma Sooners to the NCAA tournament, but he averaged what was nearly 20 points per game. He's a great inside scorer, but this is a guy that definitely needs some work for being a number 7 overall pick. Like we said, he was only a freshman. He was going to be one of these one and done guys regardless. And I think this is going to be one of these cases where New Orleans, he might just be at least for this upcoming season, especially with the way this backcourt looks, this fall for New Orleans. DeJounte Murray, Jordan Poole, good luck. I would imagine that they trade the damaged goods of DeJounte Murray, even though, I mean, like, look, it hasn't really worked out with the past two spots he's been in. With Atlanta and now New Orleans. I know it's short sample size in New Orleans. But when you're drafting Fears here, the cheaper option there, I would expect them to dump Murray. And they just got Jordan Poole for CJ McCollum. I don't know what's going on in New Orleans with all these guards, but Fears, I think ultimately, I think this guy still needs some work. He could be like a good stats, bad team guy, especially with the way the Pelicans look like next year, especially if that team's banged up, which they're always banged up. So that's my thoughts on Fears. Defensively, I would say, respectable, could get better there. But definitely a guy that's a scorer. I just think there needs to be a little bit more consistent scoring at all three levels. And then Derek Queen, number 13 overall. New Orleans supposedly loves this guy. The fact that they're trading up 10 spots to get him, giving away their own 2026 first round pick. Joe Dumars just got there in his first year at the general manager position, was working with the league office behind Silver, establishing fines to all the players in the league. And now, he comes in and he's going all in. Like, he's like, you know what? Who gives a crap about next year's pick? We think we're going to be good, even though our team's hurt every year. Zion Williamson doesn't seem motivated to play. And, we got Trey Murphy. We got all these other dudes, Herb Jones. Like, they have some, compelling players here. But when your foundation and, the guys that you're paying Buco bucks to aren't playing, then this is, just a lost team. And I don't know what the situation here is in New Orleans. I think they're good. The organization thinks they're good from, a personnel standpoint. But I think it's one of these cases where fans around the league, the executives around the league, everybody else thinks that they're honestly at the very highest, like a play-in tournament team, almost like the Sacramento Kings, like they're the 10 seed in the West. And because you just don't know what you're going to get, like from Zion Williamson. Like, if you get 41 games out of Zion, I think people would be happy. And, that is so disappointing for what this guy was hyped up to be coming out of Duke. Everything what that New Orleans was, gearing up for, and the way that they marketed him, coming out of that draft, it has just been so disappointing. Not only for Zion and all the off the court stuff, but the injuries and, just how it's all materialized there with New Orleans, because this guy was supposed to be one of the young, foundational faces of the league that the NBA can market and, put New Orleans, that's a small market, on, the national stage and, the ESPN, the showcase, the Sunday showcase games. That's not what's happened, So New Orleans, they draft Derek Queen, who, is a bruiser down low. He had a game winner versus Maryland, or for Maryland versus Colorado State in the second round of the NCAA tournament. Big part of the Crab Five Maryland Terrapin squad last year. I think he's a good player, but is he worthy of drafting 10 spots up for? I don't think so. New Orleans was clearly desperate for him. I mean, they got some centers. It's one of these things with New Orleans, like, they got a bunch of bigs, they got a bunch of guards, but like, I'm looking for, just they're top heavy in those positions. Like, I don't know what's going on there. I have no idea what the plan is. I don't think this team's gonna be good next year. And it's one of these cases, like, you don't have your pick because you went all in for Derek Queen here. And, I think he's going to be a good player, but is he going to be, like, unless you're trading up for a guy that's going to be an all-star for 10 years. That's ultimately what this was. Because now the Atlanta Hawks are thinking, God, we hope New Orleans sucks. And, that probably is going to be the case next year. So I don't know. New Orleans a massive loser in all of this, as far as the draft based on that trade and just the picks I thought necessarily weren't NBA ready, guys. And then the Brooklyn Nets, of course. You have 5 first round picks. I thought for sure, like, look, you got 5 first round picks, Brooklyn. You don't need that many, first of all, in a single draft. So, if you wanted to, you could have traded up and gotten somebody a whole lot better than what you did here. Igor Demon, I thought you took him way too high. He's a pass first guard out of BYU. The 3-point shot's been grossly inconsistent. Number 9 overall, that's pretty high if you ask me. They got Nolan Traore from France, Drake Powell from UNC, Ben Sara from Israel, and Danny Wolf from Michigan. Those are all guys that need the ball in their hands. There's only one ball in Brooklyn, and you're going to throw that in with Cam Thomas and, a guy that has the greenest of green lights, even back to his days at LSU. I don't know, Brooklyn. Like, Brooklyn, you got to just look at the OKC blueprint. Everyone's trying to go with this OKC blueprint of, just stockpiling all these picks. But if you're going to stockpile the picks, you gotta make something work here. If you like go ahead and trade up, like this would have been a great fit, for some other guys, right? Like go take 2 of those first and go get into the top 10. Like people will be gladly, they'll gladly take, extra first round picks, especially the way that this draft was set up. So I don't know what Brooklyn was doing here. Are these guys going to even make the roster? I don't know. I mean, Brooklyn, this was a team last year that won so many regular season games early to the point where they had like 15 regular season wins and they were only projected to win like 20 something games. And then all of a sudden by like December, they were already tanking. Like they had some talent last year and they just decided, okay, we're not doing it anymore. I don't know how any of these guys are going to impact anything that they're doing. I mean, like Michael Porter Jr. on a free agency trade, to trade Cam Johnson's like their best player right now. I just don't understand here with Brooklyn. They could have done so much and gotten so much more out of these first round picks. And ultimately, I just think like Igor Demon's like a project. Like Danny Wolf, he only fits on like 3 teams in the league for a guy that's like 7 feet and needs and has to have the ball in his hands. It just didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And just given what was at your disposal, Brooklyn, you could have just done so much better. For what you ultimately got here with these 5 first round picks. So Brooklyn, massive loser. We also got the Toronto Raptors. The Raptors are one of these teams that I've been monitoring a little bit. Like they're one of these bad teams that I've been monitoring closely, I would say, like the past 2 years now. Like, okay, what's going on here? What's the plan? Like for a guy that wouldn't want to watch a lot of these bad teams, the Toronto Raptors, they're in one of these interesting cases. It's like you're expensive and you think you're good, but like the results haven't been there since like the post 2019 NBA championship. And I just trying to figure out what the plan is. The Raptors. So look, here's the deal. They won 30 games last year. RJ Barrett making 25 M's a year. Emmanuel Quickley's making 32. They traded for Brandon Ingram at the trade deadline and gave him a new contract. Didn't play a single game for him last year. He's making 36. They just signed Jakob Poeltl to a long-term deal. I don't know what the Raptors' obsession is with Poeltl. And Scotty Barnes is 23, and I imagine an extension's coming next year because they love Scotty Barnes, and Dako Rajakovic loves this guy the way that, he talks about him in his post-game pressers. So not only is this Raptor team bad, but they're expensive as well. And I just didn't really fall in love with their draft pick here with Colin Murray Boyles out of South Carolina. 9th overall pick, 6'7" tall, 239 pounds. He's a big and bulky dude. But if you notice, the Raptors love these type of guys. They draft the same player archetype every single year, right? Like they had Scotty Barnes, Pascal Siakam, OG Anunoby, I sure you could put Grady Dick into that conversation. I mean, they have Chris Boucher on this roster. It's like, hello? You're paying 55 million for two former New York Knicks guards that can't play defense. Go draft a point guard. So I don't know what the Toronto Raptors are doing here. Just getting another guy that's gonna, just come off the bench for their second unit and, is for a guy that, has, the defense and, the athleticism there. Doesn't really have the greatest 3-point shot. We all saw his draft combine video of him, building a house and with all of the 3-point bricks that he was taking. He's definitely got, the explosiveness to the rim, but I just don't understand what Toronto's doing here. And these lengthy wings can only get you so far. And even Jacoby Walter that they took out of Baylor, with their top pick last year, it just doesn't really make too much sense out there in Toronto. They got Elijah Martin in the second round, who I think will be on the Raptors 905 next year. Hot when he's hot, he's really good. When he's cold, he needs some work. The problem is that for Florida last year, I would say he was more cold than he was hot, which I think ultimately will translate to him being in the G League for most of the year next season. But that's a guy that could be a little bit intriguing down the road, especially with what the roster construction looks like, even though it doesn't really look too good for what the payroll is looking like. Uh, like I said, I would have rather seen Toronto take a guard, even if it was a Fears. You traded up for him, and then sure, like, hey, if you're gonna keep the Barrett and Quickly contracts, this is a guy that can learn, develop, and come off the bench. So I don't know. There's different directions Toronto could have gone with this. I just don't like it when you're taking the same type of player, that 6'7", wing guy, when you already got six of them on your roster. And not to mention, it only makes things a whole lot worse, when you fire Masai Ujiri 2 days after the draft. And to my understanding for what was going on, just reading a bunch of articles and stuff like that out there in Toronto, like Masai was going to be on the way out regardless. They mutually decided to keep him for the draft so he can help him out. I would say Masai Ujiri, like, this is not the end of the road for him. Like, I think he'll be like in the league office working for the league. Like, he'll be working with Silver and stuff. It was one of these cases like, look, when you win the championship, you have the magic and you feel good about yourself for constructing the roster. But at some point, if you don't get back into consistent winning, the championship, that luster and that, I would say, pedigree of you winning that championship, it lingers, and all of a sudden you start losing the fan base a little, and it only has a trickle and domino effect down from there. So the Toronto Raptors, I mean, I don't know what to make of this team. Like, they're one of these. I would say, I don't want to. Maybe this is a fair comp. They're kind of like the Eastern Conference Sacramento Kings right now. And, or the Western Conference New Orleans Pelicans teams. Like, they think that they're good, or the East version of New Orleans and Sacramento. Like, they think they're good, but they're really not. And what makes just the whole thing more even funny for Toronto is that they're silly expensive. And you see what they did last year, only winning 30 games. I know Quickly didn't play most of the year. Barrett was out for some of it. Scotty Barnes had an eye injury. And Ingram didn't play a single game like this past season for them. But I just don't understand what they're really chalking up over there. And, just up top, they just seem like just a little bit dysfunctional over there, especially, firing the GM. So that will do it for our winners and losers. As far as some other, valuable mid to late first round picks that I have, teams that necessarily didn't have several picks, but I thought the fit was going to be tremendously well, and I think these are guys that are going to be impact pieces immediately. Well, I shouldn't say immediately for this one. For three of the four, I got four names to throw out here. The first one that we're going to throw out, I think, is a guy that's going to be good in several years down the road, but his rookie year, I think it's a perfect situation for a guy like Thomas Sorber in OKC. The 1 year at Georgetown, still has probably some to develop. I think he's one of these forwards and bigs that could translate very well to the NBA. Like the inside scoring at 7 feet is really good. And Sorber to OKC, look, you could sit in the pipeline, watch Chet Holmgren embrace a veteran in Isaiah Hartenstein, and sit in that locker room culture and really feel of what it looks like to be in on a winning culture, because that's what it is in OKC. You see the way the guys all love each other and all the post game pressers we talked about in our last episode. That it's just a very healthy environment to be in right now in Oklahoma City. Thomas Sorber gets to absorb that and embrace it. And I think ultimately this kid's going to be ready in 2 years from now. And he's going to be the long term Isaiah Hartenstein replacement, because as good as, Hartenstein was in some stretches, I think OKC was wanting more from him, even though they won the championship. We're going to see this is a big year for Hartenstein this upcoming year. We already know like his role, he's not a big numbers guy, but I think they just wanted more like successful pick and roll stuff to run have the ball, him run their offense maybe just a little bit more. Like they had some set plays for him and it didn't work out and stuff in the playoffs, and Dagnall tried to go to it, and then he had to peel back and not just decide we got to run it with SGA full on, and with J-Dub. So big year for Isaiah Hartenstein, I would say, because the way that this draft pick sets up, Sorber's going to be like a cheaper option for the future, especially the way the SGA contract is now. That we talked about it, highest paid player in the league now. So the Sorber situation, I think, is something that might not impact this year's team, but next year and the following and going forward, Sorber could be a big impact for that OKC front court. Let's talk about one of my favorite players to watch in all of college basketball last year. And I think a guy that I've been preaching not only to Jonathan and Lewis, but to, tons of other people, a bunch of people on the East Coast that don't get to watch West Coast basketball. And that's Nique Clifford. He goes to the Sacramento Kings. Is he the oldest player in this draft in the first round? Yes, he's 23 years old. But I think this is a guy that, if that's the only knock that you have on him is his age, that's pretty damn good. Great mid-range jump shot. He played the 2 years at Colorado State, and then prior to that was at Colorado in Boulder. Got so much better at Colorado State. Nico Medved did such a good job with him, and it was one of these things with Clifford was he had the number twos. He was like the number two option where 2 years ago at Colorado State behind Isaiah Stevens, where he didn't have the ball too much, but he could still, get his points and score and be that secondary ball handler, and then run the second unit. And then last year we saw him without Stevens because Stevens was in the Miami Heat pipeline, and it was just full on go mode for him. Like making his teammates around him better, rebounding the ball, playing defense. His on-ball defense is, I'd say, criminally underrated, and he's just a flat out bucket. And like he had 40 points versus Boise State in Boise last year. Like that's not a tough place. That's a tough place to win and play in. So Nique Clifford to me is an NBA ready player. He goes to Sacramento, where like we said, we don't know what the plan is in Sacramento with their free agency moves and whatever the hell they're doing. They got this DeMar DeRozan, Zach LaVine conundrum where it's like, have you seen these two guys play in Chicago? It doesn't translate to winning. So I don't know what Sacramento's plan is there, but they got Nique Clifford, who I think to be an impact piece. Keon Ellis, defensively, he's a great guy, got better with the 3-point shot. And then they got Maxime Reynaud, who they took in the second round, who I like as well. Might not be necessarily ready to impact the league, especially the fact that they have Sabonis, but that's a guy that definitely has a high ceiling, and he was great at Stanford this past year in the ACC, 20 points, 10 boards per game. But Nique Clifford, I think, for this Sacramento Kings team this year, will crack the rotation and be doing some positive things for that team. Our third player, Jace Richardson to the Magic. Orlando's a big-time player in the East next year, folks. Like, with the Desmond Bane trade, which I would love to talk about, during the free agency, period, and, on a separate, episode, to be honest. But with Paolo Banchero, Desmond Bane, Jalen Suggs, and Franz Wagner, like, that's a four-man unit that's going to, quite honestly, be like a top 4 team in the Eastern Conference next year. And Jace Richardson, why do I love this so much? Because he only had the 1 year at Michigan State. He's the son of Jason Richardson, who was a very successful NBA player. So he could, take, some learning lessons and, some strategic stuff from him. Was coached by Tom Izzo. We see all these Tom Izzo dudes come into the league, and they're all great for the most part. Like, they're all impact players. Great 3-point shot. His defense was underappreciated last year, I thought, as well. I think he'll translate to the league. And this is going to be your backup point guard, essentially, I think, for Orlando. And, the lineup combinations become very interesting with this team. But, Cole Anthony's not on this team anymore. They got Anthony Black, who's still like 21 years old. I don't think he's even 21 yet. Like, the ceiling for that kid to take the next step, he'd be big for Orlando's development next year. Like, if Orlando wants to be a contender, Anthony Black needs to take the next step. And I know that sounds crazy for a 21-year-old, but it's already his third year in the league, and his contract will be up before you know it. So I think with the combination of everything, I think Jace Richardson's going to fit in this very well. And, Orlando loves their guards. Like, they're taking a guard every single year. And, this is going to be a guy for Jace Richardson. Like, he was coming off the bench at the start of the season for Michigan State and didn't matter. And then ultimately he was starting, by the time March rolled around, and he was still impacting the same way. So I think it's a very team friendly pick, and a guy that's going to you could just plop him in and he'll make it work and fit. So I love that for the Orlando perspective. And then we'll keep it in Florida with the Miami Heat. But the Miami Heat, look, this is a team that I think needs to tear it down personally. Like, if quite honestly, go trade Tyler Hero. Go trade Bam Adebayo. Like, go do something. Like, especially if it doesn't work this year with how weak the East is and how so many, usual contenders are banged up with all these long-term injuries. This is the last year with Hero and Bam and, maybe some of the other older veterans. After that, tear this thing down, man, because when I see a guy like Kasparis Yagachonis from Illinois, he had the 1 year with the Illini, played overseas, stuff like that. Like, he has definitely got a whole lot of experience, just from all the Euro stuff and, the Euro ball. This is a guy where, he navigates the pick and rolls really good. Like, you set him a screen and he'll find an open shot. Some of his stuff was forced last year at Illinois and, some games in Big Ten play, I thought. But this is another player that falls right into the Miami Heat's laps. And I think they're going to find a way to make this guy, quite honestly, it wouldn't shock me, an all-star. Like, he has got all-star caliber potential, this kid, because he is a flat-out bucket. And, this is why I've been saying, like, for Miami, like, they have Jaime Jaquez, they have Nikola Jovic, like, they got some like really good players. They're in love with Haywood Highsmith. Like, they got some youthful guys that are rotational pieces in the NBA. And it's just one of these things, like with Miami, like, they're always just flirting around the play-in game, even though their roster suggests that they should be better, especially with those Jimmy Butler teams. But Miami, I think you got yourself a great pick here. I think it was a blessing that, he fell for you, because I saw Kasparis Yagachonis going like top 15, and then he ends up going to like falling outside the top 20. So look, I think this could be the long-term future point guard for the Miami Heat. I really think so. It's just going to be a matter of, does Miami really want to tear this thing down? Because I really like the intriguing young pieces here. And we all know I say it at almost every basketball episode, especially when we talk NBA, the worst place to be is in the middle. You can only be the play-in champions for so long, and that's what the Miamis, the Sacramentos, that's what these teams are. Like, you can't be doing that, because you're just stuck in neutral and stuck in the same spot every single year. But Miami, I think you got yourself a hell of a player. I think it could be an all-star, and it's just a matter of what the hell is the direction of your team, because you're flirting every year with the playoffs, and then all of it just to get swept in the first round to a damn good team like the Cleveland Cavaliers last year. So that's where I'm at with that. By Miami Heat, their youth is good, and we all know that they develop players. So That's where I'm at with some of those guys: Thomas Sorber, Neat Clifford, Jace Richardson, and Kasparis Jagichonis. But overall, I thought this was a good draft. I think it's everything's going to be centralized around Cooper Flagg, rightfully so. But I think there's going to be some picks. I think even some of these guys that I just listed a few minutes ago, they're going to be all stars in this league. Flagg might be the best of the bunch. When it's all said and done, but that doesn't really necessarily bode well being the number one overall pick, especially in recent years. Like the number one pick never turns out to be the guy. Flagg, trying to change that narrative, of course, but there's definitely like around the teens range, like that 13th pick over the years has been really good. Like that 10 to 16 range, there's been some really good NBA players that turn into all-stars and are now, foundational guys that are making impacts and are number one, number two options on some playoff roster teams. So that's where we're at right now. Um, Remember the NBA draft? Everyone has ultimately, this is what I like to say. The NBA with the draft, you have to draft well, especially the way the CBA's lined up if you want to win. So to me, that's the most important thing. You have to more often than not hit on your draft picks, but to me, it's all about the fit. All these dudes got talent, all of them. Like otherwise, they wouldn't be getting drafted. But if they're not going into the right situation, and I know it's completely out of their control, and then it's up to them to kind of, unfortunately, it's up to them to mesh and work. And sometimes you deal with dysfunctional franchises and stubborn GMs and bad ownership, and then all of a sudden 4 years later you're what was a bad situation for you, and then you're out of the league. It's one of these things. Like it's unfortunate for these guys, and some of them like this is how the system is working, right? Like a guy like Trey Johnson for the Wizards. Like quite honestly, it's Cooper Flagg's the overwhelming favorite to win Rookie of the Year, but Trey Johnson might average 25 points per game on a bad team, and he might win Rookie of the Year. So even though he might not be, the most transcending player as far as winning is concerned, it's you could take it in so many different directions here. To me, the NBA draft is so important, and as far as getting your team in the right direction. And some of these teams, it just makes me laugh. With some of the decisions that they make. When draft night comes around, how frisky and risky they get, and a lot of times it doesn't really work. And sometimes you got to make bold moves, but there's a difference between bold and out of control. And I think a team like New Orleans was a little bit out of control. And I think you got those middle tier teams like Sacramento, Toronto, New Orleans, where Miami just if you would have torn your team down 2 to 3 years ago, you wouldn't be you wouldn't be in the spot that you're in, and that's drafting around the 17 range every single year, the 10 to 17 range. And that's if you're trying to make a consistent winner quick, that's definitely not the way to do it. And forking out in free agency will only get you so far. So that's where we're at with that. But speaking of free agency, we got NBA free agency going on right now. The NBA draft is done and it's gone and all of that. We got tons of NBA trades that I do want to talk about down the road. We're going to probably let the dust settle a little bit more. I know there's a ton of them, but there's also tons of free agents going off the board right now. I want to talk about the Golden State Warriors. Maybe when Jonathan Kuminga gets signed, we'll come and talk about that from the Warriors' perspective and what their roster looks like. And, just kind of talk about the league, just the landscape of it and who's a contender in the West and who are the six contenders in the East, if there is even six. So yeah, that's where we're at with the NBA. Some good stuff right now. Definitely making all the headlines with the NFL in its off season, even though that's coming rapidly. And the NHL free agency and Major League Baseball is still there. But right now, the NBA, I have to say, like the NBA's been on a heater for like the past 6 months with all the trades, the way the NBA playoffs ended up working out, the NBA finals going 7 games. Adam Silver's doing, I have to say, Silver's doing is doing a good job, and he's trying to make it work. And we expect league expansion. I would probably say like Seattle and Las Vegas, but who knows? But I don't know. The NBA, for being a college guy, and watching more college basketball than the NBA, especially during the regular season. The NBA is they're on a heater and they're doing a good job. And the product, the way things are set up. The NFL is king, of course, the way that they're scheduled and the way that it's a year-round sport. But the NBA is, I have to say, they did a good job this year. Their regular season and their load management is still an issue. But for how the playoffs went and, with all the just player movement that's happening right now, it definitely makes for good TV, good entertainment. And, for people like me that, come on here on this platform and have a voice, it definitely makes for some good conversations to be had, which is always what we like. So that will do it for this episode of the Sports Sentiment. Once again, I am your host, Nick Urias, and be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.